Hi, everyone. My name is Brett Kierstead. I'm Vice President of Sales for Knowledge Marketing. We're the sponsor of this track today, the Media Sales Track. And, when I looked at the various different topics during the day, and if you've been in any of the other sessions, there's a perpetual theme where someone will say something awesome about a publisher's initiative and how they're using data in the business, and they're doing all these wonderful things. Penton and all these wonderful, everybody's doing all these wonderful things. And someone will ask a question and say, well, how well are your salespeople doing in their ability to take this information and sell more effectively? And almost a collective chuckle will go throughout the room. And it's an interesting, I don't know if the word is epidemic, I think, in terms of the quality of how well salespeople are carrying forward the message of automation and new technology and data and business from the internal conversations to the customers and the market that you're trying to serve. Today, this session, have two people that obviously have a great deal of expertise on this subject and are, going to impart some of their strategies and experiences on how data and technologies are being deployed to create future selling. What does the world look like that we're trying to evolve to as media companies to get a better story to tell in the marketplace? And their emphasis on sales is obviously the track that we're in here, and I'm sure Tony and Leslie will provide us with some really interesting insights as we close up this day. So without further ado, we'll let Tony lead us off and go from there. So give him a round of applause. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much. I think if I can hear myself, wow, that's loud. I would assume all you can as well. My name is Tony Uphoff. I'm the CEO of Business.com. For those that don't know Business.com and its current model, if you will, we are a leading destination for executives in growth companies. Those are companies with between 20 and 1,000 employees. And we help those executives source the knowledge, the products, and the services they're looking for to run and grow their businesses. As a result of that, we're also one of the leading platforms for marketers looking to reach, engage, and sell into that marketplace as well. What I want to be able to do today is share a little bit of the journey that we've been going through at Business.com, but a little bit of the rationale around this whole kind of crazy idea of future selling, the role of ad tech and programmatic in B2B media. And I'll start with the obvious, which is, yeah, there is a future for B2B selling of media. So irony intentional here. But I think for a lot of us who have been through some pretty wild times over the last few years, and I was listening to our friends at Randall Riley today talk about the evolution they've gone through. I used to run big parts of UBM and spent most of my day trying to predict how much print was going to decline and how much digital was going to grow and which trade show we could buy as a way of running the business. So these are wild times in media and information, and they're revolutionary, some might suggest. So I'm going to take you through this current revolution and hopefully show you some things that you can do about it. I'm then going to turn things over to my friend and former colleague, Leslie Laredo, who runs Laredo Group, who's going to talk about specifically the 10 things you can do to prepare yourself and prepare your sales organization for some of the things that we're seeing in the marketplace. For those that were around back then, there's a few of us. I started as a sales manager at then Ziff Davis, and it was a fantastic environment to start your career in. And Steve and Leslie and many of us around this room spent time at Ziff Davis. Not only was it an extraordinary company that was really innovative and did a lot of amazing things, but it afforded a ringside seat into almost every one of the revolutions that were there. I made sales calls on Michael Dell when he was starting out to sell him ad space in PC Week so he could get Dell computers out into the marketplace, early days on the campus of Microsoft. And I say that not because, ooh, wow, I met those people, but because I was able to bear witness to some of the revolutions. And I now realize that some of the patterns we're seeing today, we've seen before in similar revolutions. I was around, many of you weren't, many of you don't remember the dawning of the web. I was around at the birth of the web. I was running a brand called Information Week at the time, and technically speaking, I believe we were one of the first brands to ever go online and put our brand out in an online format, and we really understood how the web was operating at that day, and we're kind of innovators. I was then with a company called CMP Media doing some of that stuff. Was also very early on watching what was happening in the social web. I ran a media division of VNU Media, and was spending a lot of time in Hollywood running Hollywood Reporter and other media brands. And a lot of the early tech players were orbiting in and around the Hollywood arena. I was famous for advising a friend of mine, Vince Thompson, who had been hired by Mark Zuckerberg to write the first advertising plan for Facebook and negotiated a little bit of equity. I'm famous for trying to convince him that I thought it was a really bad idea and that he ought to go talk to the people at Friendster. So about once a quarter, I get a very nice note from Vince reminding me of my foolishness back then. But I did see the beginning of an interesting revolution and watched it play out. We also started to see towards the middle of 2000, we started to see more sophisticated use of big data, right? So show of hands, everybody's sick and tired of the term big data, right? We probably heard too much about it. Nobody knows what it really means. All I think it really meant then is a lot of people were starting for the first time to think about how data influences advertising. And I'm going to take you through kind of the from to shift that I think's happened here. But we're thinking about data in a very different way. And I remember about now, my radar started to go off that something different was starting to happen. I started to hear from advertisers that they wanted to know more about the buyers. They wanted buyer personas. They wanted to understand what the buyers were doing, not just what the buyers have done. As they said to me, we don't need retrospective data, we need current data. And I remember at the time just thinking, something's happening here. Don't know what it is yet, but something clearly is starting to happen. We were also starting to see some new technologies emerge that would allow us to look at data in a very different way. That leads us to today. And I think what we're seeing are the beginnings of what I call the intention-based revolution. And I'll explain what I mean by intention-based. So are people in the room, I'm sure everybody is probably bored with this one as well, but everybody know if I use the term marketing funnel, everybody by and large understands what I mean. So I didn't invent the marketing funnel, but it's used both academically and in business to explain the way people take in information broadly at the beginning, and then they narrow it as they go through a process, and then increasingly how marketing interacts with people that are going through that journey. Let's call it the buyer journey for lack of a better term. What happens in that is now, because the vast majority of this is happening digitally, is we can see through the digital body language of people coming into that funnel, we can see what their intentions are. So we can see if they're looking at certain types of content and engaging with certain types of content. And we can take that data and serve up relatable areas of content. And then there's a very delicate moment as they work through the process, certainly in business to business, right? Where you're seeing a lot of people that are discovering information, downloading that knowledge. And then there's this delicate moment where that discovery and knowledge engagement shifts over to a purchase process. So when I use the term intention-based data, what I'm talking about is that data from the top of the funnel that starts to help us understand what the intentions are of an individual buyer. And then once they've crossed over, and it's very clear they've raised their hand and say, boy, I'd like to talk to a sales rep or whatever, by that point in time, it's obvious. But I think of all of that as intention-based data. Does that make sense by and large? In the consumer marketplaces, as usual, they have been advancing this pretty aggressively over the last several years. So the first company that I ever spent any time with, and I spent some time with their ad agency taking me through this, was the auto company BMW. So BMW used to target buyers of their cars the way most people did. Women 18 to 34 by certain types of demographics, men 25 to 50 by certain types of demographics. And then what they found out is that was no longer predictive of people that were buying BMWs. What they found is the only thing that was predictive of people that were buying BMWs is they expressed their intention to buy a BMW. And you know what they found out? Guess who buys BMWs? 17-year-old kids with family money and 70-year-old guys who want to feel young. There was absolutely no, it blew completely apart any sort of demographic targeting they used to think of. So they've now completely rearranged the way their marketing goes. That's an example of intention-based data and information. So let me start with a couple of questions here for the audience. Anybody in the room know how many marketing automation companies there are? Just take a guess. Anybody have any idea? The estimates are upwards of 600. So the research analysts and a company called Lumascape total this up, and part of this is oh my God, this is just ludicrous, right? There are so many of them. And by the way, I'm using the term marketing automation pretty broadly here in terms of the breadth and depth of this, but there's a ridiculous number of these firms out there. You're gonna know the punchline here again. How many ad tech companies? Again, a ridiculous number, right? A ridiculous number. So let me ask another question, sorry. Let me ask another question. How many people in this room feel that marketing automation and ad tech have nothing to do with your business? Show of hands. Anybody think it has nothing to do with your business? Oh, come on. You're giving away my punchlines here, people. All right, one guy. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Too smart of an audience here, I'll tell you. Well, I think you know the obvious. It has a lot to do with your business. If you're in the media business, you're in the data business, you're coming at our industry from any of the components that bring these three societies, if you will, or associations together to meet here, you definitely, without question, are looking at the impact of ad tech and certainly marketing automation. I'm here to tell you that I think there's ways to harness that. And the first thesis I would start with is whether you're producing print, whether you're producing trade shows, whether you're producing conferences or exhibitions, or I've heard a lot on the last day about data businesses. I'm still not sure what some of these businesses are. David Kisselstein was very eloquent talking about data businesses. It wasn't really clear where I saw the revenue of that data business, but still see a lot of print in that business model. But putting all that aside, all media today, by definition, is digital media, because your audiences, your customers, are sourcing, discovering, engaging with your offerings via digital. So literally everything is digital today, and you have to think about your business that way regardless of the platforms you offer. Second point I would make here is that digital media and ad tech are in the process of converging, right? So we used to think of these in the early days. I've run digital media business and they kind of sit over here. Marketo, Eloqua, all the programmatic platforms, all this really cool stuff kind of sits over here. And I know my customers buy that stuff, and I know they use these platforms, and every once in a while I'll meet with the CEO of one of those companies and we have cool conversations, but that's not my business. And then suddenly I woke up one day and went, wait a minute, why shouldn't that be my business? Because my customers are asking me for lead nurturing and intention-based data and behavioral programming and all those same kinds of things. So in essence, I see that these two worlds are starting to come together. What this creates is what's the flip side of the intention-based revolution? Is intention-based media. So for those that have long faces thinking, gosh, I just lived through the last frickin' revolution and this tall guy's up here yapping at me about some new revolution. I don't want to hear it anymore. I just survived the last one. I'm here to tell you that I think this is the best news that B2B publishers have had in a generation. And I'll take a few minutes to explain why I think that and things that I think you should be looking at. I get this question a lot. Hey, Tony, this is really interesting, but what the hell should I do about this? Well, I think first and foremost, most everybody in the room, I would assume, has some form of a digital offering out there, right? Website, email newsletters, some form of a digital offering of some sort. The first step that you want to do, and I'm not going to geek out on the technology with you. I can certainly take questions at the end or meet with you individually and talk a little bit about the technology platforms we've deployed, things we've built, how we look at that. But I'm going to speak at a reasonably high level here. The first thing you really need to do is to understand the digital body language of your audience. Your audience is touching your websites constantly, and they're leaving cues every time they do. The tools, the platforms, the technologies are pretty simple today. They're not very expensive. They're not difficult to manage. You need to learn to read that digital body language. And I'll unpack this in a bit more detail in another slide as well. The second thing is, if you think what drives intention-based media is its contextual content. And by the way, advertising today is contextual content. So we tag every ad that goes into business.com, and I'll show you this in a minute. We treat it like content. So it pops up in any areas where people are looking at relatable content, because that's how we take in information. We're having a very focused conversation right now. If somebody walked in the door and wanted to talk about the football game last night and how it went, the Monday Night Football game, right? Tuesday night? Where am I here? Yeah, Monday Night Football game. It would be very jarring. We'd be like, whoa, no, we're having a conversation about programmatic and ad tech, right? Interruption-based advertising works in a really bad way. It's not a really great experience, whereas contextual works. So sort of an obvious point, but your targeted content is allowing these people to leave intention-based data signals. So the more you have that focused content, the better off you're able to read those data signals. Harness your own data and cultivate the data of other people. people have shared various things. One of the things I thought was great in some of the patent discussions, I don't know if people in the room were here, there's a woman, I don't know Joanne's last name, who gave, I thought, really good presentation of some of the data things that Penton's doing. And one of the things she emphasized, she said, we outsourced most of the tech. We didn't build it, we didn't buy it even, we just kind of outsourced and licensed some of this stuff. So I was pleased to hear her say that, because I think as somebody who's been on, not the bleeding edge, but the leading edge of some of these things, people always kind of roll their eyes and thinking, okay, this guy's gonna go do that crazy stuff. We're not in that business. It is not that, it is complex, but it is not rocket science today. And the tools are available to you today without crazy amounts of expense and betting the farm on some of these things. The last one I'd mention here would be embrace ad tech. So we can spend some time talking about what's marketing automation and what's advertising technology, but in a simple way, think of programmatic, and I want to talk a little bit about programmatic today. Programmatic is going to afford you the opportunity to do more with your business than you've been able to do previously. And eMarketer is projecting that by 2017, 83% of all ad buys will be programmatic. Now, Leslie and I were looking at some of this data, and clearly this is heavily skewed based on the consumer markets. Let's be clear about that. So, this is predominantly a consumer statement. B2B is wrapped in here, but it's a consumer statement. But I will tell you, and somebody showed on a slide in a previous session, your advertisers are buying around you based on access to data and access to programmatic exchanges. I guarantee every single one of your advertisers is already doing it. And it's happening in markets that are not sexy, high-flying, bleeding-edge markets. It's happening in industrial markets and manufacturing markets and agriculture markets. It's happening all over the place. So this is a clarion call, not a threat to your business, but I think it's a clarion call that for all of us in B2B, there's a tremendous opportunity here, I think. So if you think about kind of I speak a lot in from-to shifts as somebody who spent a lot of time in tech and watching these revolutions. So the world went from here to here, right? So if you think about the from-to shift that I'm signaling here, if you think about kind of before the advent of ad tech, a lot of us built value in our B2B media businesses based on retrospective data. We have qual forms, we have reg forms, we have email databases, we have newsletter databases. We have all these things, hugely valuable, hugely, hugely valuable. And then we took that scarcity, we accentuated the scarcity of that, and then we sold that direct to marketers, right? There's still a very nice business in that, a very, very nice business in that. But I think what's happening is that business is changing a little bit. So not only is that retrospective data still valuable, but you can complement that with real-time intention-based data. And through the advent of ad tech, you can sell direct to marketers, as you do. You can also sell indirectly to marketers via programmatic exchanges, either private exchanges or public exchanges. And the difference is exactly what it sounds like. You can set up a private exchange where only certain people can get in there and have access to your inventory, or you can go out in the public programmatic exchanges. Most are driven on real-time bidding or RTB metrics and those kinds of things. So just to keep it at a reasonably strategic level, we think we're seeing a fairly significant shift here. And by the way, I'm not suggesting, I want to be really clear about this, that there's not value in databases. There are tremendous value in databases. I'm also not saying that the whole world's going to go programmatic. I'm not saying that. But and Leslie will do a better job than I am of explaining what this means to you as you go to market too. What this does open up for you, I think, is an incredible amount of opportunity. Okay, so, smart guy, what did you do about this, right? So I took over about a year and a half ago, business.com, and most people in the room probably remember the name business.com. It's on its third life, so it was an original Web 1.0 business. I believe it at the time, Blake and I were just talking about this, at the time it set a record for domain sale of $7.5 million, I think in 1995. So it's still in the top 10 of domain sales. And by the way, someone had just squatted on the name. And so, a group bought it from this person for $7.5 million. It had a run up in Web 1.0, changed its business model after that, ran its course and kind of recreated itself as it was initially a vertical search engine, and then it recreated itself as a little bit of a business ad network of its day. Then it was sold off and to a Yellow Pages directory business called Dex1, who then promptly went bankrupt. I'm sure there was no correlation. and then just let the business drift for years and years and years and years. The equity company that I work for is called JMI Equity. They're a growth equity firm, so their recent IPO was ServiceNow, so they invest in a lot of internet and SaaS-based businesses. They looked at it, and they also looked at a small lead gen platform called Resource Nation and said, hey, it'd be interesting if we bought both of those, put these together, and theoretically create a unique destination for executives in growth companies, but also then have all of the advertising from the top of the funnel all the way through to the bottom of the funnel and be able to be a one-stop shop for marketers looking to reach this lucrative market. So that's, in essence, what we did. So I've spent the last year and a half rebuilding business.com from the ground up. And what we did was to use the funnel as our guide here. So as audiences come in on the left side looking for knowledge, products, and services, we have highly scalable content of all sorts cutting across most of the major functional areas. That's very practical, very functional. It's of-the-day content all the way down to deep dive content. And as audiences come in, we're able to serve up everything from display to text-based PPC advertising, email marketing and lead nurturing services and programs, marketing-ready leads you might call content marketing. So it's a white paper or a downloadable asset from an advertiser or sponsoring of our asset. And then all the way through to the bottom where, believe it or not, we actually built our own, we call it the eHarmony engine. In about 25 categories, it's a price quote engine that you tell us who you are, how many people are in your company, where you are on that purchase process, and we'll match you in real time with up to 5 different advertisers. And again, it happens in real time. Gets digitally verified and immediately transferred out to the advertiser. Now, our premise from the very beginning was to harness this intention-based data. For those that have built websites, which I'm sure is most of you in the room, it doesn't take you a year and a half to build a website, even as pathetic as I am at building websites. What does take you a year and a half is to build all the data platforms to do it. So we built our own DMP, and I'll unpack a little bit what we mean by DMP in this parlance. But what it enables us to do is to track intention-based data, and we actually retain the click history of every single visit to the site. And what this allows us to do is have an overwhelming amount of data that we can look at in real time. And it gives us kind of 2 key things that we're able to do. One is consistently improve that audience's interaction on the site, because ours is an owned, not rented audience model. So we want return visits and people to register and see this as a daily habit. The second thing that allows us to do is to steer the contextual advertising. And then we do that not only on the site, we have a proprietary performance marketing network that we've aggregated, that we can run advertising against that to accelerate an audience, and now programmatically across the broader web, right? So the value is in that initial first-party data. And so, you know, for us, if we've got 2.5 to 3 million unique visitors a month, that's about as many as I want. The audience I serve is 1.7 million businesses of the firmographic I just articulated earlier. These are companies with between 20 and 1,000 employees. So if I get up to 5 to 10 million unique, something's wrong with my model. I want that high value, but one that I also want is when I need to accelerate that audience, I now have got the ability to do that based on the first-party data I'm capturing and then accelerating across the broader web. I'm not going to take you through each of these. You can see I'm in full pitch mode on business.com these days, so I apologize for the sales pitch, but I'm quite excited about what we do. The one thing I'll mention here is the data also allows us to see some really interesting things. So we can watch that, that journey. All right? We can see their intentions from an early stage at the top of the funnel, and we can now start to see how they engage. So as we start to look at, particularly as you go from, let's call it brand engagement down to demand generation, you know, think about that crossover and what happens, we can now start to track back. And with certain advertisers, we're able to uplift that and start to look at things. So you can see some of the projections now of 500,000 purchases a year and $1.5 billion in terms of value of those. And this is very early days for us. So we anticipate that obviously we're going to be able to really see some interesting data. We're also having companies like Google and others that are big advertisers of ours come back and say, you're tracking purchase behavior and engagement behavior data on one of the most lucrative parts of the US economy. We'd like access to that data, not just for ad targeting. Not so sure I want to give Google access to that data, by the way. I can think they can find it somewhere else, but gives you a sense of where that data could be used and what you might do with it. This just gives you a little bit of a sense of some of the we track very carefully firmographic and demographic data. So by firmographic, the relatively obvious. So in B2B, what people sometimes I think forget when we're selling media People don't buy things, companies do. People administrate that buy. If I left business.com tomorrow, the budget of the millions of dollars a year that business.com spends doesn't go with me, it stays at business.com. This is the problem with retrospective data. So all my registration things that I register for and all that kind of stuff still show that I'm with business.com, but I've now left. Still would think I influence that budget, but I don't, right? So I've now moved on to a different company. So the things we're really interested in is not only firmographic data, but then the demographic data. Can Tony make a decision or not? How high is his spending? And what we're increasingly interested in is taking this intention-based data and seeing who else at the company is on our site as well. Would we have 4 or 5 people from the same company? Are they looking at a similar asset? If we've got 4 or 5 people that are looking at 5 tips for cloud computing for growth companies, we may be able to predictively assume they're looking at something in and around cloud computing, and what might we offer them or offer an advertiser. I'm not going to take you through the site, but it's highly contextualized in nature. So if you're down into a stream page on phone systems, guess what kind of ads you're going to get. And as you go left to right from resources to companies to price quotes, that's that engine, if you will, the eHarmony engine that I mentioned before. Again, everything is set to be very, very friendly, very easy to access. We gate things, but we don't demand that everything is gated. So we provide a lot of access and a lot of engagement. And part of the value of the intention data is we don't have to gate everything now. We can learn a lot about people, and we can run it against third-party data elements and other things to know about them, as opposed to forcing them to reg and gate at every step of a process. We also make everything we do really socially friendly, and we consider this a part of the intention. So as an example here of a post we did on social sharing importance for business, and we're getting upwards of 1,000 retweets on that, we factored that into the intention, because this could be somebody who's a bit of a thought leader. We want to understand them better. We want to understand where else they went on the site, what are the things they were looking at, because this too is an expression of their intention around a really key topic. And then I mentioned the eHarmony engine. So this is what it looks like. So in this particular case, it's an example from online marketing services. So if you went through this, it would take you through a series of questions in real time and then literally match you with up to, depending on how many advertisers we have in the category, up to 5 advertisers in that category, and all permission-based. So you would know that you're about to get a phone call from one or more of those companies. So there's a kind of transition here, just to give you a sense or perspective here. This idea of intention-based media and intention-based data is not rocket science. It's relatively straightforward. I would propose to you that you're already doing this. You may not have a strategy around it, but you likely are this data is hitting your sites, it's hitting your servers. You're probably capturing it, and you may not even know it. There are certainly platforms with which you can start to do that. What it's allowed us to do is to drive our I don't know if people are familiar with the acronym POEM, paid, owned, earned media. It's really how all media works today. So you pay to help engage an audience and promote your brand. Those people become repeat visitors, and registrants, that's owned media. They share your content and ideas with others, that's earned media, right? So all media operates off the POEM theory, if you will, in terms of an acronym. What our model has allowed us to do is to do a far better job when we do marketing to promote business.com and drive that audience. Then once we have that audience to our branded destination, we can take that first-party data, that intention-based data, and now on not only their behalf to make the audience experience better for them, for the advertiser, we can accelerate the heck out of that. So if the advertiser comes to us and says, hey, I want to drive 1,000 leads, I've got a white paper on this type of topic, we can, within seconds, analyze how many of those we would generate on the site. We prototype that audience, and we can, literally within seconds, we can come back and say, here's how many of those we can generate across our proprietary performance marketing network and or programmatically across the broader web. And this is available to anybody. Lots of Penton's starting to do this, lots of other companies are starting to do that. The key here is the value is not on the far right, the value is in the green, right? Because what you're capturing is the engagement on your site, on your destination, in your business. And so as we segue here, and I'm gonna introduce Leslie in a second here, as you think about what implications this may have for your business or for your company, things that you want to set up. It really has to do with capturing that value of the data and then thinking through the ways that you, and I hate this expression, but I'll use it, ways you might monetize it, right? Because many of us, I think, in B2B are stuck with this idea that we have these databases, and those databases are the way we magically create value in our business. Those are still very, very valuable. But I will tell you right now, you likely have advertisers who are running display advertising on your email newsletters to capture the cookie, capture the data, and guess what they don't need anymore? They don't need your email. They have that person. And they're selling that person to some other advertiser, right? That's happening all over the place right now. I know because we're doing it, right? So that stuff's happening all over the place. So the implications of this, I think, are reasonably significant. But I don't mention that for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I mention it only because I think there's a really great opportunity here for those of us in B2B. If this was a consumer media environment, you'd have a lot of people kind of saying, yeah, so what? I know about this stuff. It's still kind of new in the B2B space. So with segueing here, Leslie, you ready? Why don't we segue to Leslie, and Leslie's going to talk about the 10 things to kind of prepare, kind of bringing it down out of the clouds a little bit to prepare your organization for actually selling in this thing.
Thank you, Tony. We got the next set of slides. Hey, hello. Good afternoon. How many people were in the session that I had yesterday on pricing? A few of you were in there? Oh, good. All right. Welcome back. So we'll wait a second, get my slides going here. I'll spin off some of Tony's comments earlier, talking about the then and now perspective of the world. So Tony remembers meeting Michael Dell in his apartment. I remember selling Steve Case his first ads on Prodigy in 1988. He was my client. I actually sold him CPA type cost per lead ads on Prodigy. So, and I as a sales rep made a lot of money on that deal until Prodigy got smart and figured out it wasn't so good to sell their leads to their competitor. And another great one, I mentioned yesterday, there was a great article about the 20th anniversary of the web happened this past month or a couple weeks ago. And the article showed a picture of the first sort of banner, commercial use of online services for commercial reasons, which was Prodigy. They showed a page from Prodigy on the very top graphic of this article. And the leader ad, we used to call them leader ads at Prodigy, was an ad from Zeos. Remember Greg, what was his name at Zeos, right? Yeah. Greg Herrick, I sold Prodigy ads to. So on this page is a Zeos ad, which I was like, okay, I'm validated. Okay. Yeah. So, but before I want to get started, I do want to, I'm sure it's been mentioned a few times today, it is Veterans Day, so we just take a second and thank all those who have, maybe in the room have served, who have friends and family who have served. Let's say thank you. Important to honor and thank, so I had to do that. And also, this is talk about a little history, just my sort of grabbing of what has happened in digital advertising from the first clickable banner ad to this 20th anniversary. So a lot has happened, and future selling really is to look back and say it is changing rapidly. It's honest. This programmatic media is really changing dramatically. This is actually a slide I'm going to walk through with you real quickly. We actually spend a lot of time on this when we do our training programs because it's a great way to introduce what's happening with advertising. When we think about advertising, the role of advertising is to find the right people, right? Deliver the right message, and then do it in the right time and place. Well, now with all this data and moving from retrospective, we love that word, to the future data, intention-based data, we have tons of data that fills those three things. So the way I talk about what digital advertising is it is finding the right people, but now we're using a ton of data to do that. It is getting the right message out, and now we also have a lot of data where we can customize and version and optimize the creative. So many of us, especially on the consumer side, you've been reviewing products on a website to buy, and then a few minutes later you didn't buy, but you're now browsing the web and you get an ad that says, hey, come back and buy this product. Okay, so now we're doing real-time versioning of the creative. Lots of data for that. We actually now can really be good at delivering the message at the right time and place because we know when you shop for things. We have the data that tells us what day parts you're shopping, what day of week, et cetera. So there's lots of data for that. Now we have to add in what platform you're using. So it's not just right time and place, but are you on your mobile device, your tablet, your PC, and soon other wearable devices and other Internet of Things devices that we'll see ads on. We have at our house in Florida, we have a equivalent to what Nest is, a Google bought Nest. And there's a screen, so we tap our screen and we can set the alarm and the temperature in our house, et cetera. And I'm pretty sure at some point there's going to be a banner ad scrolling across that top of the screen. So we'll see a lot of device and format. And then the last piece is the social elements of advertising. And this is one of the new, that's a part of the POEM acronym, which I had not heard that before, POEM. I love it, the POEM part of it, which is really we need to think about data that will help us not just share, but connect with those who are investing their time in our ads and our content. So that's our world of, that's how advertising works now in digital media. And if you're sellers, how many people in the room are managing sales teams in this room? Most of you? Quite a few, about 2/3 of you? Okay. I think it's really important for them to get that. That's their job. They're selling advertising against those dimensions. So the thing that I was asked to speak about today to follow up on Tony is to get more tactical and what do you have to do to get started in this space? So the first thing I think you have to know and understand the new ecosystem and all the relationships between all these vendors. And Tony showed the slide and the Luma. If you haven't seen these slides, go to Lumascape, lumapartners.com, and you can see all the slides. They have the Lumascape for display, for search, for mobile, for every platform, and know all those kind of boxes that are in the middle there. And I've done a version of that. I simplify it. So when we teach our sellers how to understand the ecosystem, we walk them through the boxes and all the relationships and sort of take out all those logos because that's really meant for the folks at Luma who are looking at investing in those companies. We're at, okay, how do these pieces work together? And your sales team should know the difference between an SSP and a DSP and understand what the DMPs are doing. And I mean, they really need to understand this new ecosystem. Again, even if it's not in your face right now, it will be in very short order. So it's good to be proactive of understanding it. They need to start to reframe the discussions and conversations they're having. They should start to collect information. They need to be proactive in asking questions about not just, hey, you're going to buy from us again, or it's the same flight and schedules last time. It's really about what changes your advertisers are making in their decisions, how they're spending their dollars, where not just advertising, but marketing as well. They have to understand the priorities. Are they going to be moving to audience-based media buys versus just media, content-driven media buys? They should be asking the question, what's next? And it's really interesting. At Laredo Group, we buy media to advertise Laredo Group. And we get salespeople calling us. And no one's ever asked me, what's next for Laredo Group? We actually have a mobile app that's being redesigned right now. Hopefully we'll launch in a few weeks. And yeah, we might buy some media to promote our mobile app, but yet no one's asked me about what's going on, what's next in your business. And surprising that there's a lot of looking what I have to do today, not what's down the road. And that you're missing a big part of that. It's also different questions. What data are you collecting? What first-party data do you have? What other data are you going to source? Who are the data sources? I speak all the time with media buyers and senior media executives, and I ask them, in fact, I had a conversation with them, Media Smith out in San Francisco. Dave Smith, I've talked to him a few times, said, tell me what questions you want the sellers to ask your team. So I have a list of questions, right? Because they've moved. In fact, very interesting, and it's small. This is it's a small agency relative to Starcom and MediaVest, but they're the largest independent media agency specialized in digital, based in San Francisco. And he went from hiring a lot of media people, and then 5 years ago, a lot of people who had programming type backgrounds. And now he's hiring, his biggest hiring is for a data analyst. This is a small agency. He's hiring data analysts, and they're part of the team. So if your team is calling on the agency, they got to be able to talk to data analysts. They got to understand that language. So these are some of the questions. Also talk about attribution. It's a big deal. Yesterday I mentioned about last click attribution. The big brands are moving past that. They're doing very sophisticated attribution modeling. Does your team know that? I taught a course recently where, interesting scenario, but the rep that was telling me the story about how they work with this big DIY company. and they had bought a huge buy, very low click-through rates, and then the client renewed. And she goes, I was so surprised they renewed because our click rates were so low. And I go, did you ask them why? She said, no. And I said, well, they probably renewed. My guess is because they were doing attribution modeling, and they figured out using the view-through tags I mentioned yesterday that, yes, they had a huge media presence there, low click rate, but the people who saw their ads went later and bought from them. And so they got the buy, but they didn't even ask the question what data they're using. So lots of different questions. And then we needed measures of this intent and engagement. Those should be forefront of how are you going to measure it? What are the most important metrics you use? Number 3, understand who's going to manage the programmatic efforts. On the consumer side, it's a big deal right now that companies like P&G have now brought it in-house. It's not their agency, it's in-house. And we're starting to see more and more brands come to our media training classes, where it used to be agencies and sellers. We get brands there now because they're thinking maybe we should bring it in-house. And there's lots of issues with how agencies are setting up trading desks and some issues of transparency and arbitrage issues at the trading desk. So a lot of people might actually say, hey, we'll carry this in-house. We actually had a internal media buying team from Canon printers in our course a few months ago. You know, I suspect that that's one of the reasons why they're looking at programmatic in-house. So it might be tech partners, it might be other individuals involved with the decision, and also understand the timeframes for that. Number 4, you really need to understand your first-party data, and Tony talked about that. Understand you're going to be investing in and sourcing other data. And this is just actually an interesting chart from Blue Kai. Blue Kai is a DMP and a data provider and DMP data manager. And they actually, when companies work with them, they source from all these companies. It's really interesting. They're aggregating from lots of sources, and they're one of the largest DMPs out there. So if you're working with a client who's already working with Blue Kai, you got to know they're getting data from lots of sources that they can aggregate. Again, many of this tends to be more consumer, but there are a few B2B in there, Bezo, Forbes, et cetera. This is, by the way, from Bezo's site. This is just a list of all the functional areas and industries that they can target because they've collected data. Great way to know how you're being targeted, by the way, if you go to bluekai.com/registry. Has anybody done this? It's actually very cool. You can Blue Kai will show you what data they have from you from what source. So if you go there, you'll see all the data that Bezo has on me, because I've filled in lead cards for different things in marketing that interest us at Laredo Group. But now they have, so when I get ads, they're really targeted. I get ads because people know I'm in the advertising business. I'm an executive in a small business versus a large business. They have all this data on me, and I get very targeted ads. It's fascinating. I look at Blue Kai, and I could tell why that, because they have all that filled in. Number 5, talked a lot about this yesterday, about your inventory. We talked about pricing yesterday. This is really important. You have to have a strategy for your inventory and pricing around it. How much of your inventory is going to be put into the programmatic pools, how much will be sold direct, what inventory will be customized, et cetera. So part of this is really start to have a taxonomy developed, or some call it a product catalog of all the different types of ad units, and make sure you understand how those will be sold. 6 hasn't been touched on, but I assume, Tony, you have a big ad ops team over at business.com. I'm sure it's huge. A lot of people have ad ops teams. Their job is to figure out how to load the ads onto your web pages, and they do reporting and optimization, but they have a much bigger role when you start going into programmatic, and they're a big part of that team. So make sure you're investing in the ad ops area. And also make sure that you might, and as Tony mentioned, there's a lot comes out there that will help you with outsourcing of ad ops functionality. So be aware of that. This slide is this infographics from a company that does that. It was a really interesting infographic expressing all the different roles that ad ops has. 7, align your sales and account management and account teams. If you look at the large pure play digital companies like Yahoo and Google and others, they have a very layered sales organization. They have sales planners. In fact, I think Yahoo at one point had like 7 layers in the sales, deep in the sales team. And so the sellers are out selling, they're not managing the account. They have to have people who can look at the data proactively, try to figure out how to use it. There's a lot of pieces to working with data. So look at who's doing what, who sells what. There are teams now. As you saw from this graphic, we have, this is from one of our courses. We talk about there's different sellers. You might have a team that only sells to programmatic, and they're going to call on the programmatic side of the agencies, the trading desk. Some teams are now giving that role to the media sellers. They sell both to their traditional advertisers as well as they have some responsibility for selling the programmatic media. So there's lots of ways you can sort of figure out who's going to do what depending how deep your sales teams are. But you have to have a strategy for who's selling what. And also your sales marketing role. You have to have some people that are creating demand for your content. And that's a big, so the sales marketing should be a part of how you look at the world, and knowing that also that sales marketing team is not just talking to agencies anymore, they're going to be talking direct to brand marketers. So a lot has changed in sort of the segmentation of the team. To make a small pitch for Laredo Group, you need to invest in training. Asking people to go figure this out on their own, to read some blogs, to understand it, is probably not going to be the best use of their time or most effective. We do a really good job taking teams from very little knowledge and some more experience and getting them very deep into understanding how all this technology works with great reviews. So I just want to mention that we do have in-person webinars, we do have in-person training, and we have webinars, on-demand webinars. But make sure they're not just trained in the digital media side, but also trained in things like analytics and data. And make sure they're comfortable with it. They don't have to be an analytics major. They don't have to have had a degree in be a rocket scientist degree, so to speak. But they have to be at least comfortable around data. Very surprisingly, we actually was teaching a class, and I was talking about something about having a share of voice, and 10% share of voice of 1 million banners. And someone looked at me like, what was I talking about? It's like you couldn't calculate 10% of 1 million quickly in their brain. I was like, oh my God. So start with basic media math and build up. But they got to be comfortable around it, and also comfortable with storytelling. Because if they're only talking about data, they're not going to make a sale. We still buy with emotions, and we validate with facts. So yes, understand the data, but make sure they're very strong in storytelling and not just go out with the number part, because they'll lose people pretty quickly. 9, focus on new products. And there will be a lot of new products that will feed. Native will be sold programmatically, bought programmatically in the near future. Some of Native will be. But have a catalog. This on the right side here is like a catalog of all the different advertising opportunities, and always be thinking to innovate that. And we will be seeing less focus, and buyers will be less interested in buying straight old banners, and I think that's a big part of this as well. And last thing I can just tell you is stay informed. It's moving so fast. It's amazing how quickly things change in quarter to quarter. I look back at our training materials that I'm working on now that I wrote up 3-6 months ago, and we've had to change many of the slides because there's so many new intention and new ideas and new products and ways of looking at things. And so it's important to stay informed. I have a list of websites and LinkedIn groups and other things that if anybody's interested, I'd be glad to share with you. Send me an email, I'll share that out with you. But that's what I spend a lot of my time trying to do, is stay up to speed on all this quick changing that's going on. So for Laredo Group, we do, again, training in person. We do webinars. We also do consulting on sales topics. But we have our Facebook page, Twitter, Pinterest. Follow us there. I constantly post and tweet out what I think are very important for people in this room. If you're a media seller or managing a team, this is what you need to know about. Your team should know about these things. And we do have a media glossary that I update every quarter. It has now over 800 terms in there. I've written the definition for every one of them. Work of love, to say the least. It's been a project for 10 years. Started about 50 terms, now at 800, and I have a few more I need to add. So every quarter, download a new version because we're constantly adding to it. And last here is, if anyone wants a copy of this, you can send me an email. I'll be glad to share that with you. Anybody who yesterday got their email back? Okay, so I forward some folks from yesterday. Also that presentation, if you didn't get it, be glad to send it with you. As well as Leslie at laredogroup.com. So we'd love to answer questions or have further discussions.